And now covering the war in Iraq with Richard Pearl, James Rubin, and Geraldo Rivera. The Week magazine and the Aspen Institute hosted this event. It's an hour, 10 minutes.
Okay. We have two officers who served in Iraq with us in addition to those on your program. So I want a certain respectful attention now. Okay. I speak as a former corporal in the Royal Air Force. It's the first time I've ever been able to tell a colonel what to do and a major in the audience. But I'm very happy to introduce the panel. I won't waste a lot of time by giving you their splendid careers, which you can also read in the program. But reading from the right, I have Hafez Mirazi of the Al Jazeera television. Thank you. Well, actually, now from the far right, I've got Geraldo Rivera, not to be confused with Al Jazeera television. Because that was a swift change act there, which kind of threw me. I've got Salama. No, wait a minute. Where is Salama? Oh, then the next in line is Jamie Rubin, of the former States Department spokesman. Yes, he's running for office sometime or other. I've got Richard Pearl. And then I've got Salama Nemat, who is, of course, the Washington bureau chief of El Hayat. And I may sit over there or I may not. I'm trying to make up my mind. The first question I want to ask you guys is this. Iraq is the subject, the focus. We don't want to stray much from it. There's a lot to talk about. I want to ask you, first of all, and I'm going to ask you to be succinct at this stage because we're going to have to go into some of the issues. And the first question I want to ask you all, and I want no more than about 45 seconds of an answer for the initial answer, so you identify yourself. Geraldo, you're used to this, okay? You can start. How well in terms of enabling the rest of us to get a picture on which we could make up our mind, Walter Whitman's famous definition, how well was Iraq reported? First of all, I don't want you to digress from this, first of all, before the invasion. Don't wander off into other things.
Before the invasion, I can't tell you because I never really visited Iraq prior to the invasion, except for the last time.
Did you believe what you were reading about weapons of mass destruction?
Sort of.
Okay.
But to me, it wasn't the be-all, end-all. It was a reason. The intelligence didn't seem concrete, but it seemed as if those people in this town were convinced.
Okay, Mr. Marazi, what did you think about the reporting pre the war?
Well, Al Jazeera put both sides of the story. Those who said that we are the bomb maker for Saddam, and here is the evidence. And we also put people like Scott Ritter and others who said this is nonsense. There is nothing. And actually, later on, we found out that one side was more truthful or more objective.
So
than
the Arab
closer.
media, you think... can you hear me, by the way? Okay. So the Arab media, you think, was actually pre-war more accurate than the US and European media?
I wouldn't say the Arab media to generalize, because we cannot say the American media.
Okay, the Al Jazeera.
But Al Jazeera, in the case of Al Jazeera, we put both sides. Those people who said we have evidence of weapons of mass destruction, and others who said nonsense.
Okay. Jamie Rubin, pre-war.
Pre-war, I would say that the major media did a good job of reflecting a consensus on weapons of mass destruction, a consensus that turned out to be wrong. The consensus among the expert community, among the intelligence community, among all the major governments in the world.
Why were you so easily deceived?
They were wrong. They made mistakes.
I know, but did you feel personally deceived by it?
No, I believe that Saddam Hussein created this edifice designed to make people believe that he probably had something left. I believe the intelligence community made a major failure, but I don't believe that in this area the press reporting was all that bad. They accurately reported what almost everybody thought, Scott Ritter accepting. Of course, Scott Ritter a few years earlier was the one who wanted to roll tanks inside to Iraq to uncover the great weapons caches that he had found out. So Scott Ritter had lost reliability by the time you were putting him on Al Jazeera.
Okay, well, we're going to come back to why you believe Scott Ritter when he lost reliability. Richard Pearl, pre-war, did the press do a good job, or should they have penetrated the intelligence services and discovered they didn't know what they were talking about when they said mushroom clouds. Condi Rice said there'll be a mushroom cloud.
I think the intelligence services had rather penetrated the journalistic community.
Really?
Not only before, but consistently since, with disastrous consequences.
So the
Jim
journalists
is
were
right.
gullible to the CIA or whatever.
The CIA was wrong.
Yeah.
What was surprising was that the CIA's reputation for competence wasn't challenged in the run-up to the war because they'd been wrong on so many other occasions. The fact is, no one was in a very good position to question the CIA.
Yeah.
We didn't have overhead photography. We didn't have communications intercepts. We had to rely, of necessity, on the flow of information. And the only remaining question was, how competent do you think the people are who are making that assessment? And there, I'm afraid, we accepted too readily what the CIA was
Do you
saying.
think that intelligence failure, and which they fed into the media, was actually worse than the Bay of Pigs missile crisis? Bay of Pigs crisis, not the missile crisis.
As I recall, the issue at the Bay of Pigs was anticipating the reaction of Cubans when a landing took place. And
they got that wrong.
The landing was handled rather badly in the first place, and the reaction wasn't what people had anticipated.
Salama, reporting pre-war from your position as a commentator in Al-Hayat, how did it strike you?
I think that both the Arab media and the Western, including American media, did a disastrous job reporting.
Disastrous job?
Yes. I believe in between 1991, the first war, and 2003, up to the war, the American media, Western media, and the Arab media allowed themselves to be censored by the Ministry of Information. They were submitting their material throughout these 12 years to the official censor at the Ministry of Information.
Which censor? Which censor?
Saddam, the
Oh,
official
Saddam.
Iraqi government censor.
Yeah.
And you cannot report anything that they did not want you to report about. The CNN did a documentary, did a mea culpa. They confessed that they were manipulated by Saddam's regime. Unfortunately, the Arab media did not. And with all due respect to Al Jazeera, some of their correspondents were discovered to be on Saddam's payroll. The Director General had to resign because it was discovered that he was beholden to Saddam's regime.
I think that's nonsense.
Let him finish and I'm going to come to you. Yes, go on.
And so the Saddam Hussein controlled the coverage of the Arab and Western media between 1991 and 2003. Nobody reported to us before 2003 about 300,000 people buried in mass graves. Otherwise, had they done that, the premise for the war should have been humanitarian rather than
Rather than weapons of mass destruction. So what do you say about the
I'd like-
allegation?
No.
The allegation.
The allegation is nonsense. The general manager of Al Jazeera, or the former general manager of Al Jazeera, and nobody, and even Iraqi, what was considered by Ahmed Chalabi and others, Iraqi intelligence, nobody questioned him himself. People said that the embassy of Iraq in Doha, where Al Jazeera is headquartered, were bragging that we have friends in Al Jazeera, and I would bet you all intelligence agencies in the Arab world would even brag that they are buying maybe Richard Pearl, or they could penetrate CNN.
You can't buy him.
But what you could judge Al Jazeera with, and I don't want to make it Al Jazeera versus the others or whatever, what you could judge it with is what do they broadcast? Yes, there were limitations on all the media working in Iraq, whether CNN or Al Jazeera or others. But how to solve that? To solve that from your headquarters. If your reporter cannot get to opposition leaders or dissidents to say something against Saddam because they are afraid, you go from outside, Cairo, Amman, Washington, and get people to say something else. For example, in my show, I have Mr. Richard Pearl with me, and we were together in one show. He was confronting a guy from the information ministry of Iraq during Saddam time, telling him the lies that the Saddam regime is saying, and all of that stuff live on Al Jazeera for 1 hour. So if you complement your coverage and put the other point of view, if you feel that the other side is restricting it, that is good. But if you're doing an embedding reporting, and you only take the restrictions that is put on your reporter in the embedding program, and that's it. This is what happened in the war. Accepting all the restrictions, you're not given service.
Okay,
for
so
your
we're going to
audience.
come to the actual war itself in a moment. Jamie.
I'd like to get back to your original question of did we have enough information to make an informed decision, the
Right.
Walt Whitman quote that I've
Salama
ruined.
thinks, yeah, go on.
I believe that most people knew what government knew about the threat assessment. Saddam has some chemical weapons, some probably biological weapons. I don't think anyone other than the extreme advocates of this war were really of the view that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons or even that close, although the vice president led you to believe that on many occasions.
Let me just pause for a minute.
But-
just to put you, I'm
Yeah.
going to let you continue. I want to know from this audience, how many people here, on what they read at the time, put your hands up, first of all, if you believed pre-war Saddam had nuclear weapons? 1, 2, 3, 4. How many people believed he had other weapons of mass destruction? A majority. Continue.
All right. Proved. Thank you, Harry. And I don't blame the media for getting that wrong, because everybody got it wrong. Everybody that I know that was serious in this business, that had studied the issue or received information about the UN reports themselves. Hans Blick said that it was his best guess that he did still have some residual weapons of mass destruction. So everybody got it wrong. I don't blame the media for that. Where I think the media let us down was in not critically examining the administration's plans for conducting the post-war scenarios. I think the media let us down in not examining how difficult might it be to control and operate in Iraq for many, many years. What would happen to the former Ba'athist regime? Would the army just switch sides and then join the new government, which was the operating plan, frankly, of the military, that after a few months they were going to bring their forces home? And all of those hard questions that the United States is now suffering through today, that we're 2 years after the fall of Saddam Hussein and we're still fighting pitched battles across the country, those issues were not really aired.
By anybody,
Prior to the
Salam.
war.
Did you air them, Salama?
I think
I'm going
yes,
to come
I
to
think,
Geraldo in a minute. Did you air them?
Had the media done its job in Iraq, the people would have seen all over the world that Saddam Hussein himself was a weapon of mass destruction, with 300,000 people killed of his own people, not to mention 500,000 Iranians and Iraqis in the wars that he waged.
So you were in favor of the invasion, I gather, but I mean, were you aware?
Well, as much
Where-
as I was in favor of the invasion of Kosovo.
Of course, I know. I don't want to paint you as a militarist. I'm just going to ask you this question. Did you actually ever say, hey, folks, it's going to be great when Geraldo Rivera has won the war with the help of his military friends here, but what are we going to do for the peace?
To do so.
Did you foresee what Jamie's saying the media failed to do, which was to say, hey, this is going to be a difficult peace?
I don't think it's the media's job to say, to find out and discover if there were weapons of mass destruction.
No, I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the peace after the war. After the war, how prescient. I'm not making this personal, particularly, but how prescient were you and other people in foreseeing the problems that Jamie described?
Well, I don't know. We're working on a completely different front here. You know, when you're describing how the Arab media covered it to Arab audiences, we have to keep in mind.
Keep the microphone closer to you.
In the Arab context, the media is not functioning independently of the governments that own this media.
Right.
The governments are not democratic.
Right.
The media is not independent.
Yeah.
They follow a certain agenda.
Yeah.
The agenda was the government's agenda was anti-war, regardless of the
Facts.
reasons and the facts. And they did everything they can before the war, during the war, and after the war to discredit the whole process.
So you're critical of Arab
including
media.
the elections.
Okay, well, I'm going to come to
I just don't want to generalize. I don't want us to generalize once again also about the Arab media. Maybe Salama is right because he works for a Saudi publication
It's
financed
privately
by
owned.
the Saudi royal family. So this is how they deal with him. But that is not the way for Al Jazeera.
Right,
Jazeera is owned by Qatari government. What
Right,
do you mean?
Richard?
Well, I'd just like to respond to one of Jamie's points. It simply isn't the case that the American press or any other press could have predicted everything that would follow from the destruction of Saddam Hussein's regime. This was a dynamic situation. It wasn't a static situation. I believe mistakes were made that had a huge impact on what happened after the war, the occupation being the principal mistake. There was nothing inevitable about that occupation. We could have handled the immediate post-war period differently, in which case I believe we would have had a different result.
What would you have done? What could have been done differently?
On the day that Saddam's statue was brought down in Baghdad, I would have handed the keys to the Iraqis.
To Mr. Chalabi?
To Mr. Chalabi and others who had devoted their lives to organizing an effort to liberate Iraq from exactly what we were just hearing about, from the mass murders and
That's
and
an
all the rest.
interesting thought. I want to get to Geraldo and move. He may be prime minister or president after all, because the Americans were in love with him once and they fell out, and now they're embracing him again. Let's go to Geraldo, and actually, I think he's got his army boots on here today. You actually had your feet in the sand.
These boots have been in Iraq. That's
I know, but you got in trouble.
Can I make 3 quick points?
Yeah.
I was with the 101st Airborne. Remember, we had the most elaborate chemical weapons, suits, existent in the history of warfare, all of these exotic weapons. By the second week, the 101st Airborne were all bitching about why are we carrying this crap around, because everyone recognized that we probably were not going to encounter so-called weapons of mass destruction. That's point 1. Point 2, how wars start is fascinating historically. How wars end, much more significant. And I think that all of us have to be concentrating on that. The third point, I was in Baghdad when the Alibabas so-called started, when the lawlessness started. And there were no reporters there, as far as I know, who had as their angle in that month of April 2003, why didn't we keep the Iraqi army intact? My goodness, now we're going to face an insurgency. This is the beginning of a revolution. That was absolutely not the angle. People were chastising the Secretary of Defense for, not firing on looters, the looting thing, as you recall. He was saying, oh my goodness.
This is
my
Secretary
other,
of Defense is objecting, I think.
Yeah, that's right. This is Donald Rumsfeld. I told you never.
Hello, Mr. Rumsfeld.
Anyway, that's basically the point.
Okay, is it him?
Yeah, it's him.
It's him, okay. He wants to say he never said
up,
stuff happens, okay? Can we continue?
Yes.
Okay.
Turn this video. Sorry.
Okay, all right. You want to finish the point?
Well, just my point is that hindsight is 2020, but we were all kind of inventing it as we went along.
Okay.
You can question whether or not we should have invaded. I think that's a very valid issue.
Okay.
But to predict that there would be this anarchy and that it would suck us in, maybe we just didn't think it through.
After you got in trouble.
It was not on any reporter's mind at the time.
After you got in trouble for drawing a map in the sand which says X identifies whatever it was you did, which we could discuss, do you feel any responsibility? Because I thought you were very effective in portraying the troops before they went into battle. And then, do you feel any responsibility for the euphoria with which the war was reported? Then we got the anticlimax of the non-peace.
Probably I share with all of my colleagues from, probably with the exception of my colleague here to my left, you're right, everyone was involved. That is the beauty, the genius of the embedment program. We became part of the units that we were in. We were rooting for our men and women to succeed. Aside from patriotism, you also had kind of unit loyalty. You wanted the 101st to kick butt. You wanted whoever you were with to be successful warriors, fulfilling their nation's duty. It was when you crossed the berm. I wasn't there in the berm. I was still in Afghanistan, but I flew immediately from Afghanistan to Iraq. Everybody was, in a sense, if you will call us cheerleaders, that I think is probably a fair criticism to a certain extent. But we were certainly patriots. We were kind of town criers in a sense, and I don't think there was much dissent in those early days.
It's a very interesting question. Richard, you want to come? Just bear in mind this question. How far do you push patriotism, and how far do you push reality?
Well, in fact, that's what I wanted to comment about, because there was a slight element of apology, Geraldo, in the reference to the cheerleading. There was every reason to cheer. This brutal dictatorship had been brought down in 21 days. There was every reason to be proud of what had been done. And had you reported anything else, you would have misreported the mood in the country. People were overjoyed that Saddam had been brought down. Not every last Iraqi, to be sure, but the overwhelming majority of Iraqis.
Did you report they were overjoyed?
I would say also you would have every reason to be saddened for real journalism. If we are going to mix patriotism with journalism, I think that's the end
You weren't
of the
there. The
profession.
people were all Bush,
That's-
Bush. Everybody on the street,
That's
every
the
kid,
right.
4 years old,
That's
old
the
ladies,
right.
Bush.
That's the right, and this is our right obligation to cover what they
That
are
was the
doing.
ride into
But
Baghdad.
we
That was the
cannot
people on the
join
street.
them. We cannot join them as cheerleaders.
I was just reflecting
because
what they were
we
doing.
We would justify for the Iraqi journalists also to use the name of patriotism in order to be cheerleaders for Saddam or for autocrats in the region. Once we do that also, we will consider any judge in U.S. courts who would exonerate someone in Guantanamo as not patriotic.
Oh, so, just a minute.
That is the wrong thing to mix patriotism with journalism.
Is your position that Al Jazeera is actually neutral?
At least I would tell you something. We have never wavered a flag of any country in covering any conflict on our screen. We did not say we, talking about the troops that we were covering.
Why didn't you show the video of Margaret Hassan being disemboweled?
Because we're not supposed... well, let me tell you something. If you want me to give me 1 minute
Yeah,
on
I do.
that
No,
issue...
no, you can
I
answer
explain.
that question, then maybe another one, but go on.
Okay, for Margaret Hassan. Margaret Hassan, Al Jazeera was the first one to put her husband on in order to plea for people for those hijackers to let her go. Al Jazeera was the first one to report the maybe or suspicious killing of her. But we said, and we broke the story to the world, that we received a video for a lady that is blindfolded, and we are not sure if that is the lady they are claiming is Margaret Hassan. As for her beheading or killing, Al Jazeera has never showed, nor any other Arab network to my knowledge, never showed the actual beheading of anyone.
Well, that's good. Good point.
But why not show that and show Abu Ghraib 10,000 times squared?
Abu Ghraib should be shown 100,000, not only
why
10,000.
Abu Ghraib and not
by
Margaret Hassan?
American networks, because it is really sad. It is really sad
But
because
why
the
not
moral,
show the butchers
the
and what they did
the
to
moral
this?
authority of the U.S. that you should care about has been undermined by some individual people, and it is not wrong in order to show Abu Ghraib. But if you want to count, we can go and count.
We're going to go into this in great detail. Jamie?
Well, I think what we've just witnessed, and I don't consider Geraldo a spokesman for Fox as much as for his own reporting, is, two sides of the same coin. We have a journalistic enterprise that we all know very well, Al Jazeera, which has a point of view. It's the point of view, what you regard as the appropriate point of view for the Palestinians, the Arab masses, all of that. That's your point of view. That's your we. It's not objectivity. You have a group you're cheerleading for. And not your reporting, Geraldo, but your networks cheerleading for George Bush. We all know this. Everybody in this room knows this. And we have two sides of the same coin here. That's why it's so hard for you two to disagree.
There is a difference between reflecting Arab and Muslim public opinion, regardless of who is in power, and the cheerleading for one specific party or politician in power.
Salama, I know you want to come in on this.
I think basically it goes without saying. A government-run media in the Arab world is not going to give a balanced view.
You're not government-run, are you?
It is, of course, government-run and owned.
The Al Jazeera is receiving public subsidies from the government Qatar the same way that BBC World Service is receiving from the British government.
But the only difference between Britain is a democracy and Qatar is
whether
a
you are a
dictatorship.
copy, the final test is Mr. Ni'mat, as Mr. Pearl, and I believe Jamie has been, all of them have been on Al Jazeera, but it's particularly Mr. Ni'mat has been on Al Jazeera criticizing Al Jazeera and criticizing the government of Qatar.
Okay.
I would challenge him if he would allow me to publish a one op-ed piece on his Saudi publication criticizing the royal family of Saudi Arabia.
Salama. Okay, you heard it here first.
That is the difference, and that is the test.
Okay, go on.
No,
Let me get this.
there's a bigger
So much
difference.
for Arab unity.
I think, yeah, maybe they will not publish your article, but this is not my responsibility. See,
No, that's fine. But I'm just
not the
saying to you, we
editor-in-chief.
should not generalize. I have a lot of respect for Salama as someone I read his.
We all have respect for each other. Okay?
Thank you. No, but I'm saying we cannot generalize and say Arab
No,
media
but-
or American media and put Fox and
But
CNN
I want
and
to,
PBS
I want to
together.
leave Al Jazeera and just want to give you another example on a more recent example. I was in Jordan when the elections took place in Iraq. The next day, a leading Jordanian newspaper covered the news of the elections on page 19.
Page 19.
Page 19. At the other newspaper, it was the headline on the front page, but the headline screamed, 55 killed in Iraqi elections.
Oh, God.
This is the only thing they saw.
Now, how did you cover it in Al Jazeera?
It was during the whole day. I mean, we had the elections in Iraq during the whole day coverage of Al Jazeera, although Al Jazeera's work and bureaus have been suspended and shut down in Iraq since last August. And even the latest annual report of the State Department on Human Rights considered that a violation of freedom of speech by the new Iraqi government that is installed by the U.S.
The army thought, and you can respond to this, I'm going to give you time now. The army thought that it was suspicious that Al Jazeera was there when an explosive device went off and your cameras were there. They thought you had been tipped off. Give us the truth about that.
The truth is that you can go to the New York Times and Washington Post when they wrote two stories about a month ago about privatization plans for Al Jazeera. They quoted sources in the government that many investigations have been done on that issue and they have found nothing, no evidence whatsoever to support this kind of view. But the fact is that you rely on stringers almost like we had about 100 stringers all over Iraq, something that no American or any other international station could afford. And those people would immediately, once they would hear some shots or whatever, and they know the hot spots, they will be there by their cameras because they would sell the material.
Okay.
But
let me just ask you, I don't want to put you on the spot, I want to put everybody on the spot. One thing which I think we want to go into now at this juncture is, okay, we've had the invasion, cheer-led or not. We've had the toppling of the statue. We've had the failure to hand over to the Iraqis, which was Richard's point. So now let's just extend the time period to where we are today and going back a year and a half. And I want to look at how much the media is obsessed by violence, how much it's reporting what's going on the ground. I'm going to ask one of our army, Colonel here. Yeah, if you give Colonel a microphone, and if he gives you any trouble, let me know. Give him a microphone, sir. Have you got a microphone? Why haven't we got a microphone?
Coming now.
See me on the parade ground at 9 a.m. in the morning. Come forward. Give the Colonel a microphone. Okay. I want to just ask him, just to start the thing off, from what you saw on the ground, Colonel and Major, not about the invasion, not about the immediate post-looting period, but the period since then, the reporting of what's going on in Iraq so far as reconstruction's going and so far as violence is going. How did it strike you?
Well,
Just tell them who you are first.
Yeah, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Dan Baggio. I was the Chief of Public Affairs for the Multinational Corps Iraq from January of 2004 until February of 2005. Just got back on the 15th of February. For the most part, the experience that we had over there is that obviously it's natural that you always report the burning house instead of the house that's still standing. I understand that whole concept. But with that said, there were a lot of construction projects going on. You mentioned that specifically, so I'll give it as a specific example. One reporter we had from a New York publication, I won't name that publication, we set up with one of our generals, sent him on a 4-day embed to look at construction projects, multi-million-dollar projects, improvements we did, highway improvements and everything. The only story that we got out of there was the failure to complete like 7 out of 100 some of these projects. That's just an example. So I think there was a tendency to report the violence and not the construction, not the positive things that were being done. That was a natural tendency. I'm not blaming, I understand the culture, but I think, you know, there were a lot of good things going on that weren't getting adequate coverage.
Okay, thank you. Did you report, did Al Jazeera report much about the reconstruction?
Not much as the same as any other American network. I mean, most people would say, we have never heard a title or a news item saying 15 people were born in Iraq yesterday, but you would read 15 people were killed. Would that mean that the media was only looking for the bad news? I think this is a long argument concerning the media itself, regardless whether it's Arab or American or Japanese media. Is that what went wrong, and you go after that, not that the sun rises from the east?
It takes us to the very heart of what Richard mentioned, which is basically, what is the job of the American media now? Is it to actually report the 100 projects that were finished and sustain American public opinion, which is here tonight? Or is it actually to go after something that's, quote, a better story, like, somebody dismembered or whatever? What is the duty of the... How far has the media got a duty to support national policy? Richard?
Why do you have to ask the question that way? It seems to me the responsibility of the press is to report accurately what's happening in the country. And it includes explosive devices, it includes people being killed, captured, taken hostage. It also includes villages voting to take actions for their own improvement, the construction projects we've just heard about. Getting a fair and balanced picture is always difficult. It's especially difficult in wartime. But based on the conversations I've had with people who have come back from Iraq, they are stunned at the coverage they see here, because it's not the Iraq that they just left.
That's the point I'm trying to get at. You see, Sir Simon Jenkins was saying before that in the first session, that many instances where the ideological or policy point of view of the newspaper affects its selection of stories.
Well, you know what's happening in Iraq also is it's a big country. Iraq is not usually, except for Election Day, which was one of the most inspiring and incredible days of my journalistic career. And I think in many ways, the cynicism of many media outfits made them miss how unbelievable this day was. It was a day that I will cherish. I remember walking without any U.S. military people around me to polling places, seeing those people. It was 7 a.m., the polls opened. We had been under sniper fire the whole night, mortars arbitrarily being lobbed in our direction. 7 o'clock a.m. came. You didn't know if anyone was going to turn up. A mixed Shiite Sunni neighborhood on the west side of Baghdad province, a community of about 45,000. And then they started coming. The women, bringing their children oftentimes, the men, the couples, old folks, coming, and they kept coming, and they kept coming, and there's still, you could hear the sniper fire in the background, still they came. It was one of the most incredible days to be an American, or to be an Italian, or to be a Brit, or to be a Ukrainian member of the coalition, putting your body on the line, your not only your physical safety, but your national treasure, and to actually see a democracy aborning.
Well,
I think it was unbelievable.
I can believe that, but that's
the point I just want to quickly make, Sir Harold, is that the problem with Iraq, other than Election Day, is it becomes like a police beat. So the reporter's got 90 seconds. So what does he do with the 90 seconds? He does this. Basra, 3 killed. Nasiriyah, 2 killed. Beirut, not Beirut, Baghdad, 4. I just can't remember.
Why the hell has he only got 3 seconds? What's the matter with the American media? They don't report it.
Just check out the Washington Post, check out the New York Times. It's the same. The stories about Iraq today in the New York Times are page 12, page 13. If it's not some policy thing happening, it becomes a police report. And in the electronic media, that has the result of portraying an image of absolute chaos.
In a sense, then, Al Jazeera is actually doing a better job because it's reporting it all the time, whereas our media is so selective, it suffers from amnesia after the immediate event.
It depends on your audience and where things are going.
No, I don't.
If you are an American network, Iraq is just one of your stories. I mean,
you mean you've got people like Michael Jackson to report instead, you mean?
Well, you have to ask them about that, but... But I mean, if you're talking about an Arab network, I mean, for them also Arab issues would matter. For us, I would admit for you that we failed in covering Martha Stewart's release. I'm
not
sorry
gonna
for
turn
my
on
audience.
anymore.
But how many times did you show Kevin Seitz video of that Marine, that exhausted Marine shooting that suspicious character in Fallujah? How many times did you air that?
By the way, we did not shoot that footage.
You didn't shoot the video. Did you- how many times did you air the footage?
MSNBC did. And,
Okay, Richard Pearl.
we were blamed as if we did.
Okay, blame MSNBC. Richard Pearl, then Jamie.
I think Geraldo has pointed us in an important direction. The question is, what is the balance of what is portrayed? And particularly where images are concerned, because they're so powerful, they elicit such emotional responses. I haven't seen a statistical analysis, but I would be willing to bet that for every 30 seconds of positive things happening in Iraq, Al Jazeera and CNN has given its viewers blood and violence in a way that leads you ultimately to fail to understand what's going on.
Despair. Yeah.
Often to despair. It has political ramifications. The election, we just heard Geraldo on the election. I had the same reaction to the election. I talked to French friends of mine about how the election was covered on French television. And it was a third-order story in France for about a day. It wasn't given anything like the prominence that it had.
Jamie.
That was political.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie.
Everybody's a press critic nowadays. It's.
But that's how we form our views.
No, but everybody's got an opinion. Richard, Geraldo, all of you are sitting there imagining that you could actually select stories and actually make the decision about how much time should be devoted to Iraq versus the Middle East versus North Korea versus Michael Jackson versus Martha Stewart. We all have our biases, but I think if we're going to be honest with ourselves, if you watched the American media, all of them, Geraldo, not just Fox, all of them were happy there was an election. All of them emoted. I watched all the networks, and you maybe emoted a little bit more than everybody else.
I often do.
But that's your thing.
But if you compared the CNN webpage to the Fox webpage cover,
I don't know about
CNN was 55 dead and Fox was elation and exhilaration.
Geraldo, all the major media in America covered that election as important as it was, with the right spirit that they did. And maybe your amplitude was a little bit higher. I grant you that. But the bottom line is here, we have all the information that we basically need in the major newspapers, and we can fight about images. We can fight about Al Jazeera showing over and over again images that are designed to make the viewer hate the United States, and that are designed to make the viewer hate Israel. And we can talk about Fox and other news organizations over and over again putting images that are designed to achieve a purpose. I believe that happens, not in your reporting, but in your network's overall coverage. I don't believe that happens in the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, the Los Angeles Times, and the Wall Street Journal's news sections.
CNN.
They have an editorial section in which they do that. And that's one of the problems with television.
I think that's very, very unfair to my Fox colleagues who are reporters. I think the difference is...
he's talking about the network, not the reporters.
Well,
please.
Who was he talking about? Rupert Murdoch?
I'm talking about Roger Ailes.
Oh, well, I haven't seen him with a microphone lately.
Yeah, well,
he's got a lot of control there.
Salami, you want to come in on that?
I'd like to say something on what the media shouldn't do, and specifically the Arab media. And here, I hope Hafiz doesn't take it personal. I mean, he's doing a great job. He's doing a great job.
4 on 1 here today.
And he can defend everything he's doing here. I don't know why he's defending what the others are doing in Doha.
No, he's an abstraction, okay? Go on.
Yeah. Well, basically, what the media shouldn't do, and what, unfortunately, Al Jazeera is guilty of doing, as well as my own newspaper in some cases, is that, in a sense, directly or indirectly, glorifying murder and terrorism as resistance, or in the best case, blurring the line between the two. And this is, my problem. I keep asking my colleagues in Al Jazeera and elsewhere, who are the leaders of the opposition in Iraq, the so-called resistance leaders? This is the only insurgency I know of in the world that does not have a leader where people can identify with. And I tell you why. Because the leaders of this so-called insurgency is the remnants of the Ba'athist party that has fallen, and Arab intelligence services fueling the insurgency, and foreign terrorists. Because there is no indigenous Iraqi quote-unquote resistance in the classical sense of the word.
You want to reply to that?
So, and this is, my problem with that is that we have an entire generation now, we have an entire generation of young people and teenagers who look at people like Bin Laden and Zarqawi as heroes, as like the Che Guevaras of the Arab world, thanks to Al Jazeera and thanks to also the newspapers and the other media.
Okay.
I don't want to go back to Al Jazeera versus the rest of the panelists, but I would like to say about this oversimplistic view that the people that we're facing, or the U.S. is facing in Iraq, is just a bunch of Ba'athists and the intelligence. This is the same oversimplistic view that led the U.S. to the quagmire that we're facing right now. I mean, people who wanted to let audience hear what they love to hear, those are just 5,000 or 4,000 people. I think that is not the case. Unfortunately, it is not the case.
What do you think?
I wish it were the case, and that's to over.
Give me a name of a resistance leader in Iraq.
No, it's not my business.
Who is not Zarqawi?
It's not my business to give you. I mean, ask.
You don't even know
because
one.
It doesn't exist.
I mean, it's not the issue. The issue is that we read all over in American newspapers on daily basis that the tactics that the U.S. uses is recruiting more people against American prisons. And it's a dilemma, of course. I mean, how to fight guerrilla warfare in the same time that you are restricted because you don't want to intimidate or antagonize the rest of the population. The sad fact is, on daily basis, the people who are against the U.S. in Iraq, the number of them are growing, for different reasons. But we cannot just say all what we're facing in Iraq is Ba'athist. I mean, that is given too much credit.
We have to differentiate between political opposition and actually killing innocent people.
I'm not defending them. I'm not defending anyone who kills someone else, whether in uniform or not uniform. I hate it. I don't like it on my own personal view. So I'm not defending them. I'm just saying that this kind of idea of saying all what we're facing there are Ba'athists, you're giving credit to Saddam Hussein that he doesn't deserve.
Okay, you would agree they're terrorists or not?
Well, if you kill innocent people who have nothing to do with the conflict that you are in, you are doing a terrorist act, regardless also whether you are in uniform or camouflage or civilian.
I'm sorry.
If you kill a civilian,
what do you mean in uniform? What do you mean in uniform?
I mean, I don't care whether you are on American uniform, Iraqi uniform, Soviet uniform, because sometimes we say only the guerrilla, if they kill, they are terrorists. And then we face in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
There is a distinction which you mustn't obscure between people who die in the course of a war and people who are targeted for destruction who are innocent civilians, and you cannot compare the two.
I can't try the intentions. I am not an investigator to find out. All what I'm saying you from a principal point of view, if you ask about my view, I would tell you, I am against the killing of any civilian, of any innocent person, by anyone, regardless.
But as you well know, the policy of the terrorists is precisely to kill the innocent, and the policy of the coalition is to protect the innocent.
Well, I would like to go back, if you allow me, to the issue of Iraqi elections.
Right.
I am afraid that what we saw on the American coverage of Iraqi elections, or even in some Arab coverage of Iraqi elections, is that the euphoria of just people going to the polls, people going to cast their ballots. And that was not the case for how the Arab viewers saw that day. For them, they are accustomed to people going to cast their ballots in all Arab capitals. I mean, except, of course, some places where there are no elections whatsoever. But there are so many sham elections. What matters for people are the results. So maybe some people in the Arab world were not as enthusiastic as the Americans who saw the election day on Iraq. For them, they will be more enthusiastic when they see change.
I think the Iraqi elections was the...
Not the actual elections.
I'm going to come to you, don't worry. I just wanted to pull you on one point. Isn't there a distinction between the killings, as you say, by men in uniform? Let's take the US Army, where anybody who shoots somebody accidentally is the subject of a court-martial and an investigation, and the killings by al-Zarqawi and his mob? Isn't there a big distinction? When you say...
No, but see,
people
his definition has political purposes. Your definition that you can... Please let me finish. Your definition is specifically designed to show that when Israel kills civilians in the Palestinian territories, it's terrorism. That's because you're saying you can't remove the intent. And you have a specific
So you think that
goal.
if Israel killed...
Let me finish, please.
Let him finish.
Your political purpose in coming up with the most ridiculous definition of how to cover anything that I've ever heard. You're saying you can't prove intent, so you just have to report on what the results are. When we know when an aircraft has a particular target in mind, and often they show you the footage, the actual footage, and it misses the target, and it kills innocent civilians. You're saying that's terrorism because you don't know the intent. You're not an investigator, and you want to compare that to a guy going into a pizza parlor with the specific intent of killing as many innocent men, women, and children as possible because you can't figure out the intent. This whole definition is specifically designed, crafted, and manipulated so that you can call what Israel does in the occupied territories terrorism.
Why do you immediately jump on Israel?
Okay.
Why don't you say that also what I'm saying would apply? No, what I apply on the Iraqi. I told you.
Right, start now. Okay. No, continue. I want you to defend yourself. I want you to
I'm not defending myself. I am trying to find a common ground. This is the problem, that until now, the UN is failing to get a definition of terrorism because people with the agenda like Mr. Rubin, who would like to examine or to exonerate or to excuse certain people or certain armies, they can do whatever they want with immunity because they are good guys. We know them. And the others are terrorists. I'm saying that we should be blind, as the justice should be blind, and say, let's agree on universal terms together as human beings.
I'm going to have to respond briefly, Harry.
Let him finish.
Any killing of an innocent person, civilian innocent person, by Hamas, by whoever, is supposed to be considered a terrorist act. I don't care who did it.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. Now, you said that the reason I have concern is because I'm trying to excuse somebody. No, I'm actually trying to define the terrorism. And you forgot the most important point here. It's not that any killing of an innocent person is terrorism. That's not the UN definition. And I don't think you really think it's the UN. That's not the UN definition. It's for political purposes.
That's right. Yes.
To kill innocent people is your goal.
Right.
All right. When a military unit misses and kills innocent civilians, that is not terrorism. Okay? Do you accept that?
Could we agree on something?
Do you accept that?
Well, could we agree on something? I accept that as long as I could hold my judgment until there is an investigation and to find out that those people did miss and they did not.
It was an accident.
Okay.
That's fair enough.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, if you find it's an accident, okay.
Yeah, by all means. But by the way, 12 journalists were killed in Iraq and no investigation have been done for them, including someone from Al Jazeera.
Okay, that was an accident. Do you accept the journalists were killed accidentally in Al Jazeera?
Until they do an investigation, I cannot make it one way or the other.
Okay, fair enough. I want to ask, just broaden this thing a little bit, because Geraldo and you had an exchange earlier on where very surprising positions. This is it. You are now in receipt of another one of these murderous, appalling videos of a beheading. I think who would show it here? Now, let's say tomorrow, tonight, when you get back to your hotel, somebody has smuggled you an appalling video of the beheading by al-Zakari of 3 women hostages in Iraq. What do you do with it? Do you show it and therefore spread terror, or do you not show it and therefore express censorship? Geraldo, I want an answer from all of you.
I think what we have done at Fox after the initial videos is to show stills from the video, try and divorce it from the most horrific, the screaming. Remember the South Korean guy who was screaming for his life? Even Juliana Segreno recently really was this plaintive wail. We try to defuse that aspect while never forgetting that it is our responsibility to show exactly how hideous the so-called insurgency is in terms of its human rights. Right?
Okay, so you would show it, right?
Show it in part, yes.
In part. I'll just say.
Let me tell you about my network and then my personal view. My
Yes, that's
network would put like 1 minute or a minute and a half, like CNN, for example, they do 30 seconds, and the next day they do still, like Fox. For my network, they would put a minute and a half, especially if it's in Arabic, to what happened, and then paraphrase the rest for the audience. For me, I would do a still picture, and that's enough, because I am worried, personally, that maybe we would be encouraging, and not more encouraging. I'm worried about confessions, because also in the Arab media, you see the habit of people put on the screen by security apparatus and saying, this guy confessed of being a terrorist, or of implanting something, or plotting against the regime. And most of the time, I mean, naturally, nobody is going to confess for something that will result in a death penalty. So for that reason, I think it is not fair to put anything that a hostage said, or even someone who is taken as has been arrested or detainee, to put it live, because most of the time, or 99%, I would say, that is against their will. So I would go, on my own personal view, I would go that step.
Does that surprise you, Salama, what we just said?
Well, I do agree with part of what he said, but if it was up to me, I would have a blackout on the terrorist message, which is always accompanying these acts. I think that we should not serve as a forum to spread the terror on behalf of the terrorists, because this is what they want. You know, the terrorists do these spectacular... Why do you think hooded men with ski masks go on video? Obviously, they don't want to show their faces. They want to terrorize as many people as possible. The moment you broadcast this, you fell into the trap, you're doing their job. And I think, instead, the focus should be on the victims of the terrorists. The message of the terrorists should never be broadcast, because the moment you broadcast it, you're giving it legitimacy. You're saying they have a point, they have a grievance. And this should not be accepted.
You distinguish a political statement from a murderous statement, would you?
I would not carry any statement by any murderer, Bin Laden or Zarqawi and others, because you don't go into American prisons here and get the mass murderers out of jail and put them on TV and have them describe to you how they enjoy killing innocent people.
No, exactly. Jamie?
Well, this is one of the reasons I'm glad I'm not in your business, because this is a tough one. And I guess I would like to think that technology gives you some options you didn't have before, where you sort of have a gradation of what's read out by the announcer, what picture is shown, what can be seen on the website, what can be downloaded if you're really intent on seeing it. And but I definitely don't agree that you should never show this stuff, because
you're more along with my friend from Al Jazeera, right?
Yes, on this unusual case, I am. I think you probably have to show it. I think it actually, in the end, rebounds against the terrorists, because I happened to see one of them in the Fox Bureau when I was going on TV, and it took days, obviously, to get it out of my head. And I think it's a reminder for those people who often forget of the extreme cruelty, brutality, and inhuman nature of the groups that are doing this. And somehow, by not showing it, not letting anybody see it, trying to doctor that, maybe you're actually minimizing the evil.
Richard?
Well, just as a matter of taste, I think we should be cautious about putting these really horrific images in front of anyone who happens to have the television on at that moment.
Yeah.
I think the fact of what has happened needs to be reported and does get reported. But some of the images, I think, are just unnecessary.
Let me ask you a question, which is going to be the final question. Do we take any questions from the audience? Oh, of course, you're going to join in. Just a minute. I want to ask one final question, okay? My final question is this. And it's a very good piece in commentary this month, by the way. Do you give free speech to terrorists like the Brian Sheikh in New York, who sent messages out to kill, 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 and the American media carries these messages, and the Arab media carries these messages? How far is the First Amendment really being abused by that kind of process? Would you give that, what would you say to that, Salam?
I clearly said I would not give them the forum. And we have to be careful here between audiences in America and the West and the audiences in the Arab world. When you have in the Arab world 50% illiterate people, basically not educated people who just take the message and think it's a fatwa from God to go and kill innocent people. This is extremely dangerous. It's already scientifically proven that violence on TV does encourage violence on the streets. And if this is the case, why do we allow the terrorists to play that game?
Okay, so that's a no from you. Just take, if you give me a yes, I'm just going to give you warning. I'm going to ask you, why didn't we block the hate in Rwanda, the radio in Rwanda, which led to 1 million people dying? And you were in the administration then.
Well, it was a great failure of President Clinton that we didn't use some minimum level of force very quickly.
Would you? But suppressing the radio, I'm talking about.
Yeah, hate. Well, in a way, that tool of genocide should have been shut down. I believe that.
So there is a limit to this first.
In this case, I think what you're saying is the equivalent of rules that have been established through the Supreme Court about fire in a crowded theater. I mean, there are things that you hate speech. There are things that you do need to control. What I was saying about the other issue is slightly different, where I actually think that people understanding the brutality of these people and controlled through the mechanism of using the internet and all the technological advantages is a reminder of who we're really fighting against.
Geraldo?
Well, just on Election Day, as they were mortaring, they killed a 45-year-old woman. And I remember at one point going up to the corpse and saying, "Look what they did. What is this insurgency about?" But you saw the dead woman, but you didn't see. It wasn't her guts and gory. It wasn't a kind of X-rated, R-rated kind of goriness. It was kind of an not academic, but it was a tasteful, to the extent that murder can ever be tasteful, depiction. It was important to show that an innocent woman was killed just because she was trying to exercise her right to vote, but it was unnecessary to show that her guts had been blown out.
Okay, you've got the last word here. Isn't that nice?
What?
You got the last word.
Oh. I think
the question is free speech for terrorists.
Yes, free speech. Of course, there is nothing that you can put without limitation. I mean, at some point you have to have limitation somewhere or the other. But I am worried also that we would like to become guardians for the audience and for the population, the same way people in the Politburo or the Soviet Union thought that they are doing a job or a good job for their population. That is what should fit for broadcast, and that is what should not. So I am saying that, as Mr. Robin mentioned before, some of the messages that those people think, or the terrorists would think, that they would recruit people from, may be alienating people against them. It happened in Egypt, killing tourists. That turned most of the Egyptian public opinion against the same people who did these kind of massacres.
Okay.
So I would say, I will put some limits on terrible things, but I would give as much as possible to my audience and let them decide and not consider them minor, and I am a guardian over them.
Okay, thank you. Now, we can go to the audience. I was going to ask if my military witnesses here had anything they'd like to say, apart from get lost. I mean, is there any final point, quick, you want to comment on this? Because you're actually bearing the brunt of this out there.
Well, in terms of, taste and appropriateness, I mean, that's always something you have to balance. I mean, I think there was a pretty, pretty balanced view from the panel up there. I think the biggest thing, from my perspective, of seeing the news coverage, yeah, you see biases, and I don't fault necessarily the sensational reporting or the bad things reported, but I do think, going back to my earlier point, I think there are a lot of very substantial news type stories of things that were going on, progressive things that were often ignored.
Okay.
And if I was to make that one point, I think it's important to tell that whole story, and that includes a lot. I mean, we're talking a lot of times taxpayers' money that's being spent.
So it's Al Ghraib and it's water plants. You want both.
Well, you got to. And you know, the Abu Ghraib, we released the story on Abu Ghraib as an example.
Right.
When our soldiers, you know, commit atrocities, when we make mistakes, going back to the intent question, was it intentional, was it not? We report the bad stuff.
Right.
We talk about everything that goes on, but there's a lot of good stuff that it's not interested in.
Okay.
It's ignored. Very important.
Okay, that's all of you note that, right? Tomorrow morning, let me have your suggestions. Anybody got any questions? I've got time. Gentleman at the back there with the curly hair. Have I described you accurately? Yes. Give him a microphone. We've only got time for a couple, I think, but I'd be interested to know. Make it short and identify yourself.
My name's Gabe Wildow. I work for a media watchdog, so I think about this stuff a lot. I was surprised to hear all of you up there say, going back to weapons of mass destruction, that you thought the press coverage, especially you, Mr. Rubin, that the press coverage reflected the state of the expert opinion on it. Because what strikes me as the discussion of WMD continues to this day is that what the press continues to fail to do is just the way Sir Harold asked about nuclear weapons versus chemical weapons. The White House was very successful in introducing this term WMD, where they sort of group together all these weapons. I mean, if a chemical weapon, if mustard gas is sort of orders of magnitude more dangerous than a conventional artillery shell, then a nuclear weapon is sort of many more orders of magnitude more destructive than that. So what I feel the press failed to do is contextualize because just because they have quote-unquote WMD, I mean, what does that really mean? How dangerous is that? And they had, they'd had it for 10 years. So do you see any failures in that regard?
I think that's a good statement rather than a question.
I have an answer to what
Okay,
I
give
think
him an
his
answer.
intent was. What everyone forgets about was the anthrax attacks. And people forget post 9/11 there were anthrax attacks in this country that got a lot of attention. I don't know who did it, but I know that the idea that small amounts of powder can create massive fear was created not by the media or the Bush administration. It was created by the anthrax attacks.
It doesn't matter. Could have
Talking
been a
about
million.
the effect that it had on people's attitudes. And so then this idea was created of the people who flew planes into buildings having this stuff.
That's fair.
And that created fear.
Yeah.
And I was pleased with Harry's poll. The people in this room got it right. There were no nuclear weapons or even a serious nuclear program, despite Vice President Cheney's repeated statements that there might be. There were perceptions of chemical and biological weapons. And those things scare people and should scare people.
Any other question? Yes, sir. You, sir. You, sir, with the interesting mustache. Okay.
Well,
Identify.
Thank you. My name is Khalid Dawood. I'm correspondent for Egypt's Al Ahram newspaper here in Washington, D.C. And it's, I want to ask Geraldo and also others.
You look Puerto Rican to me.
All right, cool. I just want to ask you why Fox doesn't really cover the Iraqi casualties as much as you cover the American casualties, and why, in general, the U.S. media is not concerned with this issue.
All right. In terms of the
numbers of Iraqis
let's take that first. I believe that if you go back to war coverage from the beginning of history, the American reporter talks about the American casualties first and foremost, and then everyone else. It's just human nature. Especially if you're embedded with a company or you're with your battalion, your brigade, you're going into action, that's what you're talking about first and foremost. Oh my God, Sergeant Joe died or Lieutenant Smith died. I don't think that Vietnam was the same thing. 50,000 Americans, we all know, but I bet if you ask this audience how many Vietnamese died during the Vietnamese War, nobody could give you the answer because even the order of magnitude is unknown. In terms of the reconstruction, one of the things that we talk about is how much of these efforts are absolutely destroyed in a vindictive way by the insurgents. A school is built to help their children. They blow it up just because it was built by our money. I think there is a perversion there that undermines the moral authority of the insurgents even further.
Okay, Richard.
Well, of course, it isn't just war. All media organizations have criteria they apply to catastrophes even. And a bus that goes off the road in India will probably not be reported in the American media, but if it happens to be full of Americans, it will. So all nations pay much closer attention to their own their own citizens. It's not a question of suppressing.
But there is suppressing of any attempt to count how many Iraqi casualties in that war. I think, given that the U.S. is in control of Iraq, I think they owe it to the Iraqi people, out of respect, to tell them or to let them even count how many people, 100,000.
Does Al Jazeera report how many people were killed by the suicide bomb?
Of course, on daily basis. We cover whatever happens.
That the Sunni insurgents killed the Shiite innocent civilians,
of
women
course,
and children?
how many American
and
killed?
213 of them?
Yes, and how many American killed, and the month of May with the highest, all of that stuff. But the problem is that the Iraqis are not allowed, they are prevented even, to find out how many people were killed around the Baghdad airport during the battle. They are not allowed. You are not allowed, or you were not allowed to count the Iraqi bodies around you while you were embedded.
That's not so.
Okay,
That's that we weren't allowed to show them, but we were certainly allowed to count them.
Did you ever count or say how many?
To the extent that I could see the dead bodies around me, I certainly said, there's one, there's one, there's one.
How much
Absolutely.
did you see?
I think I saw a lot more than... I don't want to... I've been in Iraq 6 times, let me just say that.
Okay. How are we for time, folks? Well, and another question. One more question. If you don't have a question, I've got hundreds, but go on. Yes, miss, at the front. Identify.
Thank you. My name is Nandini Kuti. I'm a policy consultant. So, Harold, when you asked the panel the question about showing pictures of beheadings, we got a variety of opinions here from different people. Yes. But when the administration asked the U.S. media to not broadcast the bin Laden tapes, how is it that there wasn't even one independent channel somewhere who thought that on the merits of the issue it was newsworthy, that it had news value?
Which bin Laden tape you mean?
Any of them that come.
Early on?
They are not shown with audio and visual.
Jim?
I do think you have a point in the following sense, is that over time, the administration's initial claims that showing a bin Laden tape would have secret codings that might trigger the use of some terrorism began to be taken less seriously by the media over time, because I unfortunately remember very well how the bin Laden tape that was shown the weekend before the election was shown in full by a lot of networks.
And John Kerry told me that's what cost him the election.
Some people think that. But what I found that was really interesting, and in terms of media stories on this, and I don't know this to be true, but I have sufficient knowledge for me to feel like I could say it in a public forum, that what happened was that the original tape had a lot more anti-Bush stuff in it. And the original version that was given out by a Middle East news organization that shall remain nameless cut out the anti-Bush stuff, and so that they were actually double-crossing bin Laden, because they understood that the more anti-Bush the bin Laden tape was going to be, the more it would help Bush in the election. And that actually the really anti-Bush stuff didn't come out until the day of the election, where it was almost like a Michael Moore video describing all of the flaws in the Bush family. So I think your point is right, that that initial moment in America post 9/11, government subjected to some hysteria too.
Okay.
Are you asking Al Jazeera next time to show everything for Bin Laden?
Okay.
Not to
somebody here
suppress
can. I want to ask you one final. No, we've had enough from the panel. Thank you. Just a second. You've been brilliant. You've been a wonderful panel. I want to ask one final question. I want a show of hands. If you're shy, you can just sit on your hands. All right. You're in charge of a major news organization. Actually, looking at you, you ought to be. Those of you who would show the next video brutality from al-Zakari, raise your hand. Those of you who would suppress it, raise your hand. Well, you've got to make some decision one way or another. Pardon? So part of it? Option 3, you'd show part of it, but not the grisly bit. Okay, that seems to be... Well, listen, the panel agrees with you. And I must say, what a brilliant panel we've had today. And on behalf of the week, I want to thank you all for being such an attentive and wonderful audience in this panel.
Thank you all for coming. Please take a copy of the Week magazine, and hopefully we'll see you next year.